Welcome to the first IZoomBard's virtual Zoom performance, IZoomBarding. We're performing this tonight in aid of Legs4Africa, the brilliant Bristol-based charity, more of which you'll hear later in the show. For those of you who thought maybe this show was going on from 7 till 10 in the evening, I can assure you that it's just going on for 60 minutes. And the IZoomBards, we are a group of 4 Bristol-based poets who came together about 8 years ago for a specific poetry project, poetry tour of Brunel's Bristol, focusing on certain of his projects, etc. And hence we got our name, the IZoomBards. And we are Pamela Benham, Deborah Harvey, Dominic Fisher, and David Johnson, myself. And I think without further ado, I'll go straight into my poems. Each of the IZoomBards will do a short set in the first half and another short set in the second half. So our first project, I say, was about Brunel's projects in Bristol, and I suppose his greatest engineering achievement was the Great Western Railway. And it got me thinking about what would arts and creativity and things like that have been like if we didn't have railways. Without railways, there'd be no Lonesome Whistle, no Runaway Train, no Rock Island Line, no Waterloo Drain, no climbing up Beatop with overnight mail, no Taybridge Disaster destroyed in a gale, no Poirot sleuthing the Orient Express, no heroine tied up mouthing distress as the engine looms and the music swells. No Hogwarts train, no vanishing spells, no Thomas, no Edward, and no fat controller, no jam-packed commuters wearing their bowlers, no Chattanooga choo-choo, no track number 9, no taking the A train, no Santa Fe line, no brief encounter, no Whitsun weddings, no soul train ridden by Otis Redding, no Addlestrop remembered, no Highline Park, no midnight special lighting the dark, no Casey Jones, no Homeward Bound, no blues harmonica, steam train sounds, no painting by Turner of rain, steam, speed. So I think it's conclusive that all of us need railways. And our next poetry project was also about a Brunel engineering achievement, which was the Clifton Suspension Bridge. And we did a poetry walk across there. We shared information about the bridge, plus writing lots of poetry about it. Clifton Suspension Bridge. Why do we love you? You're not top of the list when it comes to the longest. In fact, you're a relative shorty compared to the Humber or the Hardanger or dozens of bridges in the Far East. You weren't the first. There were several before you. The Mayans got there in 600 AD. You're not the oldest in the UK. The Union Bridge that crosses the Tweed has done so since 1820, you see. But none has a setting quite like yours, perched on the Avon's time-worn bluffs. And few, if any, took so long to complete from concept to final fruition. And now you are here, a part of our lives, a backdrop for love, a source of our pride, our icon, our gateway, our welcome back home, as important to us as the Pope is to Rome. A symbol of strength, a dash through the air, a bow to boldness, an IZoomBard's flair. And from that project, a few years later, we had a non-engineering project, I suppose we could say. We produced a poetry walk around University of Bristol's Botanic Garden. And this brought out a lot of interesting poems from the 4 of us. And in the Botanic Garden, of course, there's wonderful specimens of all sorts of things growing. And there's some magnificent trees. And one in particular caught my eye. Ginkgo biloba, fair maidenhair tree. You are a mystery to me. Living fossil, one of a kind. How did you find the will to go on when so many faltered? How did you stay when so many were altered? Even today, you're out on your own, growing in pavements all over the globe. Your leaves uniquely fern-like, bilobe. Majestically tall in gardens and parks, spreading a blanket of buttery gold, thousands of miles from where we are told you began. A division of one, a taxonomist puzzle, your ancient ancestors found in a fossil whilst you persevere. When Enola Gay dropped her bomb, little boy, and Hiroshima was completely destroyed, 6 ginkgos survived. They live on today, as do others, they say, that were spreading their leaves when the Buddha was merely a babe. Ginkgo biloba, fair maidenhair tree, you are a mystery to me. The threat that man poses to their food, their homes, as a road bulldozes through hedgerow and jungle and heathered upland, stressing the planet more than it can stand. Bees have their own personal problems that also give me concern, like why they've never learned about windows and doorways and the best ways to exit. And I fret about whether solitary bees feel lonely at night when the chill of the evening precludes more flight. And mining bees, have they got a canary to warn of the dangers of fire damp blight? And mason bees, do they meet in halls, each with their apron and funny handshake? And how do they do it when they've got no hands? And the carpenter bee, with his tribute band, humming the chorus to Close to You, buzz, 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 as the crowded hive waves pollen-dipped limbs like so many candles in the wind. And that's just the start of my bee-fired angst as I struggle to comprehend the role of each of the 24 species of bumble that live on our island. And then there are flies that look like bees. They worry me. Are they disappointed that they never made the first grade, that even the humblest of worker bee will always leave them in the shade? At least if we humans could give bees a break, that would be something for them to take hold of as they wrestle with cognitive behavioral therapy and the latest buzzwords in cod psychology. Well, that's all for me for the moment. And now I'm going to introduce you to Deborah Harvey, another of our wonderful IZoomBards. Hello, Deborah.
Thank you, David. Hello, it's lovely to see everyone. Of course, Brunel was an engineering genius, but not all of his schemes were successful. Dubbed by locals his atmospheric caper, Brunel's atmospheric railway ran from Exeter to Newton Abbot for 8 months before technical difficulties forced its closure in the autumn of 1848. Mr. Brunel's atmospheric caper. This is the 1848 train from Exeter St. David's. Leaving behind the Victorian railway, its smuts and grit and soot, the rat-gnawed leather, mordant salt, impatient shareholders, your scheme that wouldn't run. Through the windows, Exminster marshes recede, meadows, trees discard their detail, rippling sand flaps map themselves in sepia ink. And our backs are pressed to the back of our seats as we climb through summer skies on surprisingly solid, broad gauge vapor trails. Looking down on Starcross Pumping House, the backs of cormorants, gulls, the river languid, glistened to its mouth, and we're flying to the east of genius, west of your rash imagination. Yes, everything's possible up here. Your atmospheric failures swooping and soaring over startled water. And you living long enough to grow old at the window of the house you never built, still scanning the blueprint of horizons, still fine-tuning the machinery of dreams. I grew up as part of a very large Bristol family, although by then with a base in Bishopston. If you go back a few generations to the 1880s, you find my great-great-grandparents, William and Mary Block, living on Christmas steps. They were strict Plymouth Brethren, And they ran a sort of early takeaway selling faggots and peas in buckets to the men laying tram lines in Bristol city centre. The following is a true story that's become part of our family mythology. The Mary Block. Pleasure for my great-great-grandmother was always deferred. You'll get your reward in heaven, the creed of her fellow brethren as they trod their narrow path towards a stern, starch-collared God. Abstinence deemed a virtue, while hardship fell like blessings on their heads. Not that Mary never softened. At times she pitied the wanting faces of her offspring. Scarlet ribbons, marbles, a waxen doll. You'll get it when my ship comes in. Almost a promise when you live by the harbour of a city abristle with ships, and surely not idle, for Mary Block was never idle. Unlike her daughters, sent out for pig's fry, but sidling along the quays in search of adventure amongst the stacked timber, the bales of tobacco, the casks of amber Bristol milk, and finding a ship gilded to legend by a shadow-shuttered dawn, the name Mary Block engraved on her bows and escaping like orisons from their mouths as they hallelujah up Christmas steps towards disappointment. I'm sure most of the people here tonight, or at least those of you based in Bristol, will have heard of Sarah Ann Henley, who was jilted by her lover and who jumped from Brunel's suspension bridge on the 8th of May, 1885, only for her dress and petticoats to fill with air, parachuting her onto the muddy riverbank. She died 63 years later, a reluctant celebrity. Fallen woman. Mud sticks, sister of Icarus, under the nails of pointing fingers, to the skin of idle tongues. You can scrub your treacherous dress, those voluminous petties. The prurient breeze still lifts the hem and sniffs beneath. You tumbled before you stepped from Clifton's soaring parapet. The city spread between your legs like a dowry to the wind, which wrapped itself around your body and possessed you, as you somersaulted like a clanging knell and plumped the lecherous lover's bed that dipped to catch you as you fell. I love this time of year when the evenings are getting lighter and longer and we don't have to get up in the dark. My next poem is about the opposite end of the year, or at least the far side of it. And it's a sort of prayer for nature to get us through winter. It's set on Dartmoor and it refers to Piles Copse, which is one of the last 3 high altitude oak woodlands on the moor. This poem was read as part of the IZoomBard set at the Bee and Pollination Festival in 2019. October. Somewhere I can hear a lark, a desultory bee out late in heather, mistaking the warmth of the sun for summer, unaware the hours about to slip, febrile mornings flare then gutter, darkness close over our heads. Like bumblebees that cannot fly, oaks can't grow on this high ground, but no one's told them. Piles Copse digs in on its steep slope, looping roots around heaped rocks. Its leaves rust flags against a dusk that seeps from cemeteries of peat. If I could pour this honey light, store it in jars on cellar shelves, I'd dip my fingers in its gleam until my skin grows green with moss, my tongue bleeds sap. I'm now going to hand you over to our next reader. Please give a warm wave to Pamela Benham.
Hello. Good girl. Can you see me? When the IZoomBards prepared for our first outing, we read about Brunel, we discussed Brunel, we explored, and it felt as though his spirit somehow inhabited the places that he'd called into being. And so this is Brunel in Templemead Station. You didn't see him, did you? As you scurried head down, intent through the crowd, coffee in one hand, laptop gripped in the other. You didn't feel his presence, but a wisp of forbidden cigar smoke curling through the concourse teased as you ran for your train. Now, settle in your seat, place your possessions neatly, sip your caramel frappuccino, flip your laptop open, and find a message on the screen. The time is not far off when we shall be able to take our coffee and write whilst going noiselessly and smoothly at 45 miles per hour. Let me try. You blink, and the figures on your spreadsheet bounce back. Wheels glide over level tracks. Your smartphone offers you a text. Tell them that the route I shall survey will not be the cheapest, but it will be the best. How often do you ride this route, never aware of its gentle gradient? The man in the seat opposite removes his stovepipe hat, rises and hands you a note, then vanishes into the buffet car. Bristol Temple Meads to London Paddington, Brunel's billiard table. Brunel's beautiful Clifton Suspension Bridge was opened in 1864, sadly after Brunel himself had died. And when it was opened, there was tremendous rejoicing. And the very first person to cross it was a young woman who eventually had to pay a penny for doing so. And in 1937, she recorded her memories of the day on the radio. Victory on the Suspension Bridge. My name is Mary Griffiths. I remember it so clearly. I'm 94, and there's nothing wrong with my memory. Of course, I'd like to be able to run the way I used to, but no point wishing for miracles, although some called what I did that day a miracle. It just felt natural to me, 21 years old, a slip of a girl, slim, swift, light on my feet. We went to the grand opening of the bridge, and there were crowds and crowds of us, such excitement, such rejoicing. The bigwigs made speeches, everybody cheered, they declared it open, and a young man began to run. My uncle, who knew how fast I was, said, "Go on, girl." So I hitched up my skirts, great, long, clumsy things we wore back then, layers of cotton and cambric and linen and wool, heavy enough to hobble a racehorse, leapt onto the bridge from the Clifton side and raced hell for leather, charging past him to the leeward side, pipping him by several yards. Hooray! No, not very ladylike, but I'm still glad I did it. And now I'm talking on this wireless contraption. We had nothing like it in my young days. Always something new and marvelous, isn't there? When we were getting ready for the Bee and Pollination Festival in the Botanic Garden, I was reading about bees, thinking about bees, dreaming about bees. And I recall the speech which Shakespeare gives to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Henry V's Archbishop of Canterbury. And when I came to the line, "The singing masons building roofs of gold," I put down my pen and wondered why I was bothering. But I did bother, and I pinched the marvelous words for my title, "Singing Masons Building Roofs of Gold." I am thinking about bees. They crowd my memories and populate my dreams, surfacing as puzzles for my daylight brain. A stage covered in tennis balls. Where are the bees? Ah, now I see. The Archbishop of Canterbury recommending them to Henry V, a model for a well-ordered kingdom. He doesn't know their ruler is a queen, but everything is spot on otherwise. Another night, another dream. Wartime, and I'm in a theatre. Soon, Arthur Astley will ask a child to join him on the stage. I'm out of my seat and up there beside him as he sings, "Oh, what a glorious thing to be, a healthy, grown-up, busy, busy bee. I'd like to be a busy, busy bee, being just as busy as a bee can be." Why am I dreaming lions? Samson arrives as the answer, killing a lion with his bare hands, finding both bees and honey within, then asking his own riddle about sweetness from strength. In my garden, Leaf cutter bees make lacework of fuchsia leaves. In my mind, the bees return to the burnt-out roof of Notre Dame, swarm on balconies and bicycles in Berlin, make honey for Jill Archer on the radio, bring music to the Lake Isle of Innisfree, pattern the arms of Mancunians and the strips of Brentford players. My head buzzes with them. I pick up my pen and write them on the page. And now I hand you over to another IZoomBard, Dominic Fisher.
Hello, nice to see you. One day last summer, I found a bumblebee resting, and this is how and where. Bumblebee in a sunflower. You serve them well, warrior woman, voyager, gatherer, horticulturalist. You flew light years from the hedge castle to weigh your fur down with sweet dust. Then find the way on the lines in your mind, across deep space, our potatoes, the road, returning to feed the children of the Queen yet again, only to die in a month or two. So rest yourself on the surface of this sun, gather strength. They won't miss you yet. You serve them very well. I first read that poem at Bristol University Botanic Gardens last summer. And it was there that I learnt that orchids are the most numerous kinds of plants on the planet. And an information board there also told me that orchids have evolved unusual and imaginative methods for attracting pollinators. Imaginative methods. Some look like bees, and bees believe them, being seemingly bumbling, loose, easily led by flowers. Some look like miniature monkeys, and maybe there are miniature monkeys who get turned on by petals. Other orchids come from under the ground to find lovers, imitate lizards or shining flies. In time, no doubt, in a world in which orchidaceae dominate, they will set traps for men, who in season will emerge unclothed from the flowers, dazed, thickly coated with pollen, since so often they are bumbling, loose, easily led by imaginings. Now a poem by a predecessor IZoomBard, Stuart Carswell, who I hope's actually made it in here because he's just emailed me to say he couldn't find the link. Anyway, Stuart is a scientist and poet from the Forest of Dean, and he left Bristol for Cambridge. Here's Stuart's poem, Sonnet for Immigrants. Tomorrow we'll leave on the voyage, loaded with promise to arrive in a land that's rich in sun and find our fortune buried in the sand on the opposite side of the world. Our life savings to take us there, to a place to face the future in, with the gamble of a one-way ticket. Our dream is across the horizon, beyond the ocean, between the lights. The dream of wealth and opportunity, hope and possibility. The dream we'll make it in Australia, for no one returns a poor man. The last IZoomBard's poetry tour before the lockdowns was in spring last year at the wonderful Arnos Vale Cemetery. Some graves there are very grand, some are very humble. A Victorian child's grave prompted this poem. The story is imagined, but I hope you find the details plausible. Excuse me, sir. Have you seen my mother and father? Mr. and Mrs. Williams, that's our name. Williams, there, in lovely letters, just above my bed. That's me, Mary, though they call me Molly. Our house is by St. Philip's Marsh, back across the river where they lost me. Mum is Alice, Dad is John. Mum does sewing, Dad goes up the ironworks. The lady in the little house across the path says they're waiting at the gates, but they aren't and I can't get through. I'm worried she meant other gates. I see Mr. Patton sometimes, who collects the sewing on a Friday. Mum says how that's funny, a Mr. Patton and the sewing. I don't reckon he can see me, though I freeze when he comes. He whispers, "What you doing there, Molly Williams? Are you catching fishes? Is it cold?" Cold and quick as knives, but thick as mutton broth down on the bottom. Angels like the stone ones came and caught me. Sleep, Molly, till you rise with the just. But I wake up like the boy next door, though all he says is, "What's for dinner? What's for dinner? What's for dinner?" I beg your pardon, ma'am. Have you seen my mother or my father? The next poem too comes from that poetry tour in Arnesvale. As the prophet Isaiah has it, all flesh is grass. Soil to soil. You are the table of the elements. We are the seated and the feast. Made of yourself, of grindings, bone and wing dust, crumbs of trees, you undo us, you remake us. Orange red with iron, volcanic brick, you are fire and rotted blood. You are bright with lime and mica, stiff with ancient fish, floor of heaven, roof of hell. Thick with silts, grey as smoke, wet with fermenting broths, you are streaked as nests of snakes. You offer water in cups of uncooked clay. Hold out all your hands for us. Hold out all your hands, fill our mouths, though we strip and burn you. Support us even under escalators, car parks, carriageways. Bear our weight, our numbers. Bear our weight until we must become you. Disconnect our joints and junctions. You save our skins and turn them into leather, or strip us to our ribs, but in time receive us in the pathways of nematodes, the fortresses of ants. Consume us with bacteria, with microscopic animals. Return us here as moss, as grass. Make us the table, then the feast. I'm now hoping to introduce you to Phil Tunstall, who's going to tell us about the charity we're supporting tonight. If Phil's here, could he give us a wave and a shout? So it sounds like Phil hasn't made it. So I'm going to ask David just to say a brief word about Legs4Africa, since you've also kindly donated to that charity by buying a ticket for tonight. There's also a video which I can highly recommend, and I'll put a link up to that in the chat box at the end of this performance. So, David.
Legs4Africa was started several years ago by a youngish Bristol person who had been to Africa and seen the horrible injuries that can happen from treading on mines, etc., especially to children. And coming back here, he then discovered that prosthetic legs that are made for children in this country, once they grow out of them, they're never used again, but they're perfectly acceptable. So he started in a small way a charity to recondition these legs and send them to Africa, where they were gratefully received and made such a difference to children's lives. Now that obviously the charity has grown a bit, they're still doing all that work in Bristol, repurposing reconditioning the prosthetics. But in Africa, they're also training technicians to be able to fit and to modify prosthetic limbs there. So it's we feel quite strongly it's a very worthwhile charity. And if at the end of this show you feel that you would have liked to have given more than £4 to Legs4Africa, you simply go to their website, www.legs4africa, and it's simple as that. Go to their donation setting, and you can give some more money. Now we're going to give you a 5-minute break.
During the 1950s, 60s and 70s, a number of babies who had died just after birth or were stillborn were buried in unmarked graves near the front entrance of Arnosvale Cemetery. At the time, there was a stigma around stillbirth, and these babies were dispatched with their parents often unaware of where their bodies had been taken. Thankfully, attitudes to grief and loss have now changed. I wrote this next poem in memory of my late godmother, Betty Daveridge, and her son Richard, who was stillborn in Bristol in the mid-1950s, and who might well be buried at Arnosvale Cemetery. The details of the way these mothers and babies were treated are taken directly from Betty and Richard's story. Small lives. Small lives stopped before they started, stuffed in a bag with birth-stained sheets, dumped in a bucket, enamelled and scrubbed, curled like a rabbit in its own blood. Stuffed in a bag with birth-stained sheets so nobody sees or acknowledges loss, curled like a rabbit jugged in blood, carried away in the dead of night. So nobody sees or acknowledges loss, they're swaddled in secrecy, shrouded in shame, carried away in the dead of the night without any word of where they've gone. Shrouded in secrecy, veiled in shame, the hope of their mothers has disappeared without any word of where it's gone, told they've lost nothing, told not to mourn. These mothers whose hope has disappeared, buried in earth in a nameless spot, who are forbidden to mourn what they never lost, now tucked under blankets of tussocky grass and buried in earth in this nameless plot. Yet they carry this love and never forget, and shredding the blanket of silence and loss, they call out their names to the stars and the dark, and no one who loves will ever forget. And the moon's a scrubbed bucket, enamelled and white, that is pouring out stars across the dark skies, for all the small lives stopped before they could start. I suspect that many of you here tonight will have at least some connection with Bristol. And I think and I hope that most of us would agree that the city has a shameful habit of denying its slaving past, which was the foundation of so much of its wealth. My final two poems touch on this. The first refers to Perrow's Bridge, which is named for Perrow Jones. And I'm sure, as many of you will know, he was born into slavery on Nevis in about 1753 and brought to Bristol by his master, John Pinney, at the age of 30. He died still a slave out near Long Ashton in 1798. Perrow's Bridge. It's early morning. Mist cuts loose the harbour's mooring, sets it floating over waters, melting into sky, while I drop anchor in the present on this bridge of hearts and letters marked on padlocks in scratches, Tippex, permanent ink. It's not for me to second guess what you might think. If you could stand here on this crossing that is carrying office workers, shoppers, lovers, your slave name. But I'd seize the hands of these couples, these children. I'd tell them love knows nothing of shackles, locks, and keys. My final poem is about the long overdue fall of the statue of Edward Colston on the 7th of June 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protests that followed the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Its abrupt removal after decades of requests and negotiations that were blocked at every turn lifted some of the shame I feel as a white Bristolian. Looking at the empty plinth, I could feel the air rushing in, an irony that isn't lost on me. And suddenly air. And in this moment, as they haul his statue down and roll it clanking to the quay, drown it in the reach, we grasp the enormity of a story come full circle, a black knee pressed to the slaver's neck, and suddenly air where all our lives stood cruelty, shame. We're now going to return to David, who is in Arnos Vale Cemetery.
I hope I'm a bit livelier than some of the inhabitants there anyway, and it's nice to be back so quickly. I don't often get asked back so quickly to a poetry event. Anyway, yes, Arnos Vale was a Victorian necropolis, I suppose, and it was designed to give the feel of Arcadia, you know, it's landscaped and all that. Of the nation's sort of 100 favourite poems that normally come up, one that's well known is Gray's Elegy in the Churchyard, but this is Dave's Elegy in the Cemetery. The bell is rung to halt the speeding bus, and we alight our visit to begin. Keenly we enter there with little fuss, and are amazed at all we see within. The splendour of a Raja's eastern tomb, restored by those who recognised his worth. How different from the faded plastic bloom left lying on a grave of humbler birth. Up the winding path we greet the woodland, home to owls that do not mope at night. Here the forest deals them out a good hand of living food, snatched up in silent flight. In amongst the shrubs and clinging creepers, a tilted vault sits topped with marble urn. Here within lie two eternal sleepers, C of E, Baptist, death does not discern. In a quiet corner, guinea graves lie low amidst the grass, these simple stone squares, all that a family and friends could buy, but no less a sign of love and prayers than the polished obelisk reaching out in pious hope for those interred below, whose wealth, earthly riches were acquired no doubt, as the fortunes of others failed to grow. This morsel of Arcadia, a myth made fact, is now welcome sanctuary to lover, artist, thinker, wordsmith, to deer, badger, woodcock and honeybee. And as the sun sets over Totterdown, it's time to leave this peaceful corner and let the night put on its dusky crown. Day is a time for Walker and mourner. Now, Deborah's already talked about Bristol's slavery past and the demotion, if you like, of Edward Colston's statue. When this happened, a friend of mine who was a sort of a voluntary exile from Bristol felt rather a pang of things that he missed in Bristol, the sort of lively action and all that. And he commissioned me to write a poem about Bristol, about the arts, about things going on in Bristol. And this is what I wrote. It's a poem from the point of view of Edward Colston's statue on that day. It was only a quick dip, no time to doff my coat and stole, no points for style in the dive, it was more of a victory roll. I'd never seen the dock from below its murky surface sheen, its bottom muddy like my ships of the tide washed clean on their way to the Channel and Africa's shore, loaded to the gunwales with goods to buy more cargo of misery and despair. But what wealth they brought me! What lifestyle so fair, money beyond avarice's dreams. Yes, out of my hearing those captive screams. It took the young, not the merchants, to see through my spin. It was their ropes and effort that dropped me in. I've been on that plinth for more than a century, hoping that no one would notice my sin. And the sound of my fall circled the earth. Bristol again showing its worth, this city of sanctuary, this city of arts, this city of people from diverse parts, this city of Banksy and Massive Attack, the city of Brunel and railway tracks. I know Bristol's not perfect by any means, but as a place to live, it gets in your genes. And should you leave it for good, I'm sure that you'll find that Bristol goes with you forever in mind. And so far, nobody's mentioned pandemics, COVID or anything like that. So let it be me to do that, I suppose. And we hope with restrictions easing a bit, things are going to be easier. But as I tack up the high street, like a close-hauled sailing boat, avoiding pedestrians, I wonder how much longer I will have to cross the road, play the non-Samaritan, create a social distance. These days, I feel uneasy watching movies on TV when the actors hug and kiss, and then remember times when I did such things as this. And now I'd like to hand you back to Pamela, who is going to take you on a walk in Arnos Vale.
I am indeed. The Victorian cemetery we've been talking about, which is home to the living and the dead, to walkers with and without dogs, and of course, to ghosts. A walk in Arnos Vale. The woman with a dog walks off, dropping her paperback and crumbs. Rooks gather, squabble, peck and fly, leaving one who rises and grows tall, a stalking figure, dressed throat to toe in deepest, blackest mourning. When she lived, she made a healthy living, dressing the grieving in bombazine and crepe, black armbands and ostrich feathers, jet jewelry and mourning rings. She wove dead children's hair into soft circles, tenderly hidden under gold engraving. This dark figure disappears through trees. The woman with her tired dog returns, sees her book, and stoops to pick it up. Contented with their walk, hungry now, they head for home, leaving behind, unnoticed on the ground, a small jet button. This last topsy-turvy year, yes, I am referring to COVID and so on, it's brought such a curious, bizarre mixture of feelings. It's robbed many of us, most of us perhaps, of our sleep. And it's also made us long for exactly what we can't have. This is Night Traveller. Sleep came easily to her, waking too. At 6:30, her eyelids flicked open. She turned, reached for his back, felt only the smooth, cold sheet. From the bedroom window, she looked down to the garden, where insomnia often took him, to deadhead dawn roses, but rain had kept him indoors. Sometimes small hours' hunger drew him to the kitchen, and he invented sandwiches she'd find half-eaten as he slept head on hands beside ketchup and jam. She followed the trail of paper boats, found him curled asleep on the sofa, one hand dangling over a bowl of water. Beside him on the floor, a map, ringed in red the name of every unreachable Greek island. Now, being well over 70, just over a year ago, I obeyed the government's instructions and battened down the hatches for the predicted 12 weeks. And for more than 8 of those, I never went beyond the garden. Then I cracked and I started going out at 5:30 in the morning, which was strange and often marvelous. Surprises in the time of coronavirus. On the morning of the 58th day, for the first time, she left the front garden, walked uphill, saw the sun rise in a clear sky, heard no sound of human or machine, just clean air filled with birdsong. Next day, she climbed for views of the city. Rooks broke the silence. 2 skinny men, their feet in a litter of cans and bottles, leaned over the back of their bench, trying to stroke a squirrel. Yesterday, sunrise showed her the bridge, empty of movement, as still come to life. green and gold countryside beyond, all of it background to a photo shoot, a gymnast poised as if for flight. This morning, sun shone on the water, boats were still, people ran on the banks. A man in a faded blue tracksuit told her, "We must savor these moments." "I do. I shall," she replied. And now, my last poem, as the trees are heavy with blossom and we start to inch our way back to real life, I hope, here's a hopeful sonnet. When the tender plant survives the sudden frost, not the large unlikely things, world peace, planet saving, cures for hunger and disease, but small packages of hope and wonder, which combine to ambush me with surprise. When a dropped china bowl doesn't break, a special dish cooked in haste tastes good, a halting apology succeeds and mends a painful rift, when seeds, planted clumsily, neglected and forgotten, still persevere and flower. And I hand you on to Dominic Fisher, our final IZoomBard for this evening.
Thanks, Pamela. This next poem was also written in lockdown. So this time we're indoors. I always found Peter Pan's self-imposed arrested development rather disturbing. I also felt sorry for pirate Captain Hook, Peter's enemy, who never seemed to win. So here he is in retirement. Captain Hook shows off the new kitchen. "So come on in. What do you think? Swanky, eh? But do be candid. Oiled oak worktops, Belfast sink, and all these gadgets work one-handed. So if I untwizzle my old hook, then slot in this fancy blade and turn it on, hamburger look. Who said piracy never paid? Meringues, you just swap this for this. Egg white, sugar, gently whisk it. Nice low heat, piece of piss. While we're waiting, have a biscuit." I came ashore at last a winner, hence posh new kitchen, slightly niche. But you'll be wondering, what's for dinner? A jug of rum and then a quiche. My next poem is a sestina, which has end words that repeat in the different verses in different ways. This one concerns beetles, the rose chafer in particular. True beetles. A rose chafer is a box of clockwork, its head and feet the movements of a watch that show from underneath the lacquered case. It tick-tocks green-blue as it winds in deep towards the heart of a rose. It flashes as it motors through a thistle or air. No other true beetle purrs through the air that I know of, turning up like clockwork in July, or that you might say flashes. If, say, one long evening you stop to watch stag beetles flying straight into the deep, there'd be unchanging black in every case. They are all vanishing in any case. Our dominion on earth was all hot air. We went too far, too high, got in too deep. Why didn't we stop at clockwork? The tick-tapping in our heads is death watch, chewing through. No wonder we see flashes. The night sky is stiff with beetles, flashes, and gods who gave up on our hopeless case. Crabs, dogs, fish-tailed goats creep and crackle, watch unconcerned with the burning in our air, the unwinding of our stuff, our clockwork, the sinking of our filth down to the deep. Our leaking ship of fools is out too deep. It unships ballast, it smokes and flashes. Remember how it once ran like clockwork, when museums kept beetles in a case, and there were insects thick in the twilight air, all going down, abandoned on our watch. Both true and untrue beetles, as we watch, are in decline, but still burrow in deep, like doubts, and still puttering through the air. A rose chafer colour shifts and flashes, settles and then shuts its metallic case of elytra, shields its wings with clockwork. We'll watch as the world flickers and flashes, in now too deep perhaps in any case. A clockwork beetle rumbles through the air. My last poem was prompted by the recent unexpected appearance of pure white daffodils in the garden. They probably came from Roy, the now retired fishman, who at least two people here will remember. Fishman daffs, Narcissus thalia. They are linen ghosts going ta-da on white trombones in the striped sun. They came off Roy's van how long ago now? He would toot, bringing haddock, cod, bass, salmon, trout, pollock, maybe ling, all pale in trays. Roy in a white coat, offering also startling lemons and papery bulbs in small plastic pots. So here today, going woohoo in green sun, is a bunch of nuns, brilliant white as Roy's van. And thank you all for coming tonight. As I mentioned, there's a video link which I've put up in the chat box, and I'll put up again, and I'll hand you back to David.
Right, well, I think this is a moment where everybody could unmute if they wanted to and show their appreciation, should they feel like doing that.
Hey. Bravo.
Encore.
Right, well, thank you all so much for signing in tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've certainly enjoyed presenting the poems to you. Thank you for supporting Legs4Africa. If you'd like to donate more, I say go to their website. The IZoomBards are all published poets in their own right. So if anybody would like to find out more about their poetry collections, if you just either put a note in the chat room or send us an email, and we will let you know how to improve your collection of poetry books. Right, well, I think that's all there is to be said now. So thank you very much. If you have been, thanks for listening.